How's it going, guys? I chose to do my assignment on Anheuser-Busch, which is a Belgian-based brewing company. I believe Anheuser-Busch is operating as an oligopoly of the beer industry. Just a few facts about Anheuser-Busch. They own over 200 beer companies, including Budweiser, Corona, Stella Artois, just to name a few. They also just clinched a merger that took over a year to close of SAB-Miller, which is the second largest brewing firm, for over $100 billion. And they also recently acquired Northern Brewing, which is the biggest home brewing company in America, which really goes to show how they'd like to capitalize on all aspects of the beer industry. Apart from beer, they also own many soft drink distributors, including agreements they have with Pepsi, which means they manufacture and distribute products such as Gatorade, 7-Up, as well as Pepsi, obviously. Breakdown of the industry, there are 4,824 reported breweries. The National Beer Wholesalers Association breaks these 4,824 breweries into a few different categories. The smallest group accounts for less than 2% of all domestic volume, but accounts for more than 93% of all breweries. And the largest group, which is the extra large group, is 21 breweries that produce 84% of all domestic beer. I think that's important to notate because, when you think about 4,824 breweries, you'd like to put Anheuser-Busch into a purely competitive market, but it's important to realize the market share, 21 breweries producing 84% of all domestic volume, um, which just kind of furthers the argument that Anheuser-Busch is operating in an oligopoly. Here's a graph that further breaks that down. In 2015, Anheuser-Busch was responsible for 43.5% of the market share, which isn't included the second category, which is Miller Coors, owned by SAB Miller, now owned by Anheuser-Busch. So the 2016 numbers would look more like 65%. Um, a lot of the data that I was found online wasn't updated with the merger since it happened so recently. I think they closed at the end of July, but this was right before the merger. I calculated a Herfindahl index based on the graph above. I added not only the 43.5 from Anheuser-Busch, but the 25.1 from Miller Coors. And the number I got was 5,277, which is pretty high, standard of an oligopoly. Just a few more characteristics of the industry. As I said earlier, the number of breweries is 4,824. And that's according to the TTB, which is the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax Bureau. As far as their product, I would say they are similar but not identical. As far as control over price, I would say they have some, but within a limited range. I would say generally people that are going out are willing to pay anywhere from $3 to $12 for a beer, depending on the size and the type of beer. As far as barriers to entry, I would say they are relatively high. The startup costs include the capital investment for all the equipment needed to brew the beer, the raw materials, the patents, and the licenses needed to sell the beer legally. I think another important one, which is probably the most important in my opinion, is brand loyalty, especially to companies like Anheuser-Busch. People, especially the older generation, in my opinion, find a type of beer and they tend to stick to that. They don't really stray too far from that exact type of beer. For example, people that drink Budweiser, Corona, that's that their type of beer. They choose to drink that beer specifically. Whereas the younger generation, people like me, like to try what's out there, different sorts of beers, local stuff, and not just support big beer companies like Anheuser-Busch. The change I wanted to talk about was the increase in micro and craft breweries that I was just talking about. The first microbrewers started in the 1980s, and they were spurred by tax breaks from smaller brewers. Technology, I believe, played a major role in the growth of craft breweries, with social media, dedicated beer sites for connoisseurs, stuff like that. A term I stumbled upon when I was doing research was premiumization, which is an industry term that describes the willingness by consumers to spend more money on beers that require higher price points. I think that's very important in this case. Um, as I said earlier, people are willing to pay more money for local craft brews, stuff that's different from your run-of-the-mill Coors Light, Budweiser, Stella Artois. Um, Big beer tries to win more on volume, where craft brew tries to score bigger on price. I believe in the rise in craft brew will cause a slight decrease in the demand for beer produced by Anheuser-Busch. Here's a little before and after graph of the demand curve. As you can see in the before picture, the profit margin was relatively large, and in the after picture, the profit margin has shrunken substantially. I think people will always drink beers produced by Anheuser-Busch, and they will continue to dominate the market. But I do believe there is a slight decrease in the demand for beers produced by Anheuser-Busch because of the growth of all these import and microbreweries. Here's my Works Cited page. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback. I appreciate you listening.